Welcome in to the Ben Burnett Show. This is going to feel very different. My guests are not really guests. They're, if we were in Blue Chips, the basketball movie, they're friends of the program. And I have Carl Appen on the ones and twos, Boomer Sooner.
Boomer.
Hans Appen with his hard right voting Republican voting record and his Beto hat.
You got it.
And the one and only
Yay.
Cadillac Jack. Welcome.
With his Reagan Bush hat.
With his Reagan Bush hat.
He's eating hats over here.
And his very actual hard right voting record.
Everyone is represented at the table.
Yes.
All parties.
But we don't. I don't. You know, I only ever look at Hans's voting record. I don't ever look at Carl's. I should go back and see. I bet Carl's like Green Party libertarian. Mm-hmm. Hans, I want to get into something. So I want to thank Chiringa for catering lunch today.
Thank you, Chiringa. It was delicious.
They are also very good friends of the program. Travis, Andy, Lauren, love you guys, each of you. If you ever want to walk around downtown Alpharetta and have yourself a little frosé, there's nothing better.
Bring the kids. Got a nice little green out there, water fountain.
Catch a buzz.
Chill.
Do some yoga.
Do some yoga if it's the right
Cornhole.
day. Hans, I want to talk to you for a second about your vision into podcasting, how that was a media company change that you wanted to make. How does it start? How does it go? Where do you pick up, scraggly jackasses like us along the way? And then how do you define success? So any way you want to unpack that, I think you probably know more about it. No offense to Caddy.
No.
I think you know more about it than the three other of us probably put together just based on your research and foray into jumping in here. So give the people what they want.
Well, even if that's true, I appreciate that, but even if that's true, I don't know. I mean, that's part of what makes podcasting, I think, so interesting, is that it is so new, and the industry is growing so fast and kind of catching up to the demand. I mean, the demand is, I know Caddy was looking at some stats last couple days. I mean, it just continues to go through the roof. And we were just talking about the number of shows that we just personally listen to. I mean, I might watch one or two news programs when I go home from work, get ready to go to bed. But throughout the day, I will listen to 10 episodes.
How do you find the episodes of podcasts that you enjoy, Hans? What's your search method? Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that podcasting has is finding podcasts.
Quantifiability.
Absolutely. And I think that's the biggest problem. It has been since I think it launched. How do you find yours?
I can tell you a big way that I find mine, and I think it's just, I love it because it's dinner table conversation. We have friends over for dinner, go to a party, kid's birthday party, whatever it is. Inevitably, we get started to talking about podcasting. And without fail, everybody pulls out their phone, and you sort of look at each other's podcast libraries. Oh, what's this? What's that? And, I mean, that's your show, Caddy, My Second Act. I mean, I've done that a number of times.
Thank you.
And it's great, too, because you're scrolling through their phone and finding the show for you, and it's just, I go ahead and hit subscribe while I'm there. You'll like this.
Like
Listen
on their
to
phone.
this episode. Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Just whore it out.
Yeah, seriously.
Give me your phone. I'm going to subscribe to
whatever it
everybody's
takes, man. Whatever it takes.
Yeah. No, I mean, and for sure. But then, people reciprocate. I was talking to a buddy of mine.
Some don't, by the way.
Hate that. We hate them.
We still on the podcasting nut, or
Some do, some don't.
Put that in the put that in the outtakes.
I apologize. Continue, Hans. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but no, I mean it had a buddy of mine who's big into like true crime podcasts, and I told him that a true crime podcast has been sort of on my top of my wish list for the Appen Podcast Network since we started getting going. They're one of the more popular categories of podcasting. And it's sort of, there's a lot of synergies here with what we do at Appen Media, and we cover crime and blotter news, all that kind of stuff.
Especially amongst elected officials.
Maybe a podcast all in of itself. But
that's a very busy lane, though, isn't it, in the podcasting world?
It is,
true crime stuff?
but again, we look at demand for these things, and I don't know what would be interesting to see. You look at TV ratings, or radio or print, whatever it is. It would be interesting to kind of side by side compare demand and viewership or readership, whatever it is, with demand for podcasts, because I would venture to guess if you sort of looked at wherever there's a drop off and compared it to the increase in podcasts, that probably, mirror images of one another.
Okay.
I mean, that was a part of it, is that kind of getting back to the original question, Ben, of how and why we got started, is just that we recognized that it was a growing industry, or a growing category in the media world, that the audience that Appen Media traditionally doesn't reach, we're largely a print news company, are younger folks. And that's what, the younger demographic, they're all about podcasting. So it was an attempt from us to kind of reach out to them in part.
Do you get as much feedback on, how do you get feedback on your podcast network and the various shows? How do you quantify them? What makes one successful?
I don't want to know. It's kind of like when I was in radio. I never wanted to know my ratings.
No, it's not.
My fears.
It's not about that. But to him, like
I totally understand.
Yeah,
it's certainly a fair question.
Yeah, and part of my job is to sell sponsorships or ads onto our shows, and it should be one of the first questions that an potential advertiser asks. How many listeners does the Ben Burnett Show have? How many listeners does My Second Act have?
Thousands.
Yeah.
Tens
of thousands.
No, just tens.
Yeah, dozens. Go on.
But that's a big part of it is, gosh, I forgot I forgot the question.
No,
it's hard to keep up with you guys.
How do you track?
How do you quantify it? Yeah.
And what have you learned? How do you do that differently today than you did 2 years ago?
So, and it's critical that you do. I think one of the things we look at, internally, and actually for both of y'all shows, as we're looking at stats for, what resonates with listeners. I do a show called Inside the Box that is kind of in hiatus, but quick story. One of the favorite things I like to tell about that show, as it relates to your question and listeners and how many people are gauging listeners and whatnot, is in 2018, I personally interviewed both Stacey Abrams on the Democrat side and Brian Kemp on the Republican side. And we sort of planned out this, we're going to package these two. It's a 2-part sort of voter guide, and we'll roll it out, and it'll be our, best shows ever. And they were great. The interviews were fine. We probably did about 30 minutes per candidate. The listenership was great. But then I want to say it was the next week, there was a walkout at Cambridge High School. This was right after one of the school shootings. And the walkout, the idea was they're protesting a lack of movement on any kind of gun safety legislation, what have you. And I interviewed 2 of the organizers of that walkout. They were probably, 15 and 16-year-old high school girls. And they came on to the show, and I kid you not, the listenership for that show probably was double the combined listenerships of both Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp.
Do you think that was because it was a national issue that registered so closely to home, or because you pride yourself in a pretty tremendous way, and I probably have more of this with what I do than what Caddy does because he's more morning drive. Do you think that it was the fact that it was such a national polarizing issue that had some reach locally, where it was a tangible thing that everybody heard about and was widely covered by the media, and you were really the epicenter driving that? Do you think?
I think there's probably some truth to that. I think that's a part of it. If I were to venture to guess what probably played a bigger part in it, two things. One is local. People love to hear things that are happening in their backyard from people they know or they might run into at the grocery store. I think that was a big part of it. And to the extent that people are probably just tired of hearing from political elected officials as well. I'm sure that played a part in it. But the other part of it that I think was relevant is that, these two girls that I interviewed they're very social media savvy. They know how to find things on the internet or how to share things on the internet. And you better believe when they were interviewed by the Appen Podcast Network, they were excited to share it with their friends and their teachers and their grandparents. And there's a certain amount of just kind of local virality that you can just create by the subject of who you're interviewing.
I had, it was actually the last one we put out. I don't know because for those of you sitting at home, I cut most of these 2 or 3 months ago that are rolling out currently. So they're not as present to my life as they necessarily are to yours, which I think is also unique if you can do something like that. But I had a phone call, David Chatham, who is a legacy builder, realtor, commercial property owner in Atlanta, called me on Tuesday and he said, I just sat down with Miles, his oldest son, this morning and I saw it come up on my subscription feed and he goes, he said, Ben, what you don't know is that I'm about to finish a book about more or less everything that we talked about for an hour. But in 200 years, my great-grandchildren's grandchildren will be able to actually hear me talk about that story. And I have never thought of anything like that in the same way. Yep. And I thought that was he said, if they would let me come in there, I would love to just do the audiobook there. I was like, well, you have to find the time, brother. I don't know how fast you read, but he goes, it sounded so authentic and real. And I said, yeah, David, it was. But I think that some of the authenticity, regardless of the issue of the day, I think there is something there. It is less commercial. And I think that although it is commercial, Chiringa, ding, although it is commercial, it is so much more of a personal influence and touch or local to you or your life. You have to seek it. It's harder for it to seek you.
There are extra steps.
Yeah.
And that's, when we launched the My Second Act podcast, it was so important to us, even on the back of my business cards, there's very simple verbiage. It's 3 steps, I believe, Hans. Here's how you download a podcast, because it's still new to so many people.
Oh, yeah.
And there are so many people that have not made the jump yet to podcasting because you do have to seek it out. There's a couple of extra steps. It's not like you hit preset 1 in your car and it just appears, And
you're on the bull.
Right. And so I think that that's one of the biggest challenges, even as this format continues to grow and just clobber all other forms of media.
Yeah.
I think that there's a percentage of people that have not yet downloaded or subscribed to a podcast. And those people that have not at this point are the toughest to convert. It's kind of like if you're an artist and you come into Alpharetta specifically and you play Mayor's Bank Amphitheater, which is a concert venue here in town that seats about 13,000.
It's beautiful.
You can go to State Farm Arena in downtown Atlanta, but there's 18,000 seats to be sold there. The difference in those two venues is 6,000, I think. Those are the hardest tickets to sell, those 6,000 that remain. And that's why a lot of artists will come up here, because they can sell out a Mayor's Bank in Alpharetta and say they technically sold out Atlanta. Talking about history.
Yeah, well, tell the story about how you made the switch over here, because I am very proud of that.
of what now?
Of how you got into the industry.
Well, I got fired. I mean, I had to do something. Is that what you're talking about?
No, the podcast industry.
Yeah, me and him, man. Just us two slums sitting here just dragging you and Donna
Ben
over.
wants you to brag about Ben.
Yeah, come
Well,
on.
no, I remember.
pour it on.
No, I remember the night that you and I and Don, my wife Donna, met at Avalon, the hotel at Avalon, over drinks, and we were talking about podcasting. I think we were in front of Hans within 48 hours.
Yep.
The history, though, one thing that we have as podcast hosts is a permanent record, and for of your family, because the My Second Act podcast is often it's stories, it's parenting, it's schools,
relationships,
and current events and trends and things like that. But we launched 3 months before the pandemic hit, so we have a personal historical record, a timeline, if you will, in podcast form of what was going on in our lives during one of the most unpredictable, difficult, and challenging periods in the history of the world, I think. Because podcasts never go away, and that's something I tell people. I get asked a lot, when do I listen? Well, you listen when you're able. You listen on your timeline. You listen when you have a few minutes. You can go back and pick up where you left off. It's not like radio. So going back to the 3 simple steps of how to explore and find a podcast, there's a learning curve. And I think that you have to do a lot of hand-holding with people to convince them to come over to this world.
But once you get them,
yeah,
you got them.
Of course. The conversation that we had that night was us all talking about podcasting because your show had launched. I was a guest on your show, I believe.
You were. And Dono, for unbeknownst to me, was like a regular listener, and I was like,
she
really?
Told you that.
Really?
She told you that.
Okay, well, I was like, so I didn't actually have one. I was like, I have one? Somebody got it?
I'm kidding. But, I think that Hans, you and Carl and the family were very, very smart. And people ask me, where did the Appen Podcast Network come from? And I think, and it was interesting to hear you share the story a moment ago, because I always assumed that that's what happened. The print industry can be a bit challenging right now.
Mm-hmm.
My wife Donna works in the print industry as well. Any successful and intelligent business owner has to know when to pivot, when to adjust, when to
diversify.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was so smart of you to do that, not only to attract the younger demo that you spoke of, because that is podcasting, really. I wanted to ask you about, I made some notes, sorry guys, the print versus podcasting sell. Because I would imagine that those are two entirely different buyers, as they're called, or advertisers.
Yeah.
Is it easy to convert print advertisers to podcasting? Or I would think that's a challenge.
Yes, but I would say it's not specific to print versus podcast.
Okay.
I mean, it is in many ways it's part of that old selling acronym, not acronym, phrase. It's 10 times hard, more expensive to find a new customer than it is to keep an existing one. So the where that plays into it is, people get familiar with what they're doing,
right?
Whether it's print, whether it's social media, radio, whatever it is. And most people who are spending money on marketing, at least that we deal with, they're small to medium sized businesses. They don't have time to learn about what a podcast is. Or
Carl and I go chase Land Rover and Rolex.
But those companies would get it.
Well, and that's a, again, that's different because a podcast has the potential for a worldwide audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both of y'all shows have been listened to in, if not every state, almost every state at this point. But there's it's a different product. If it's a different sell, it's a different audience. So it is harder in the sense that it's something new and you have to sell it. You've got to explain what the product is, but I don't think it's unique to podcasts or unique to print.
One thing that I use when I pitch sponsors is the fact that your messaging and your brand will live forever, in perpetuity, because podcasts never go away unless you don't pay your fee for the
hosting services.
In that case, you may lose some, but that would never happen. I kid, but that's I think it's true that we have had sponsors on the My Second Act podcast where there was maybe a call to action to get people in the door, which is no longer
relevant,
active, because they're no longer a sponsor. There's a lot of examples of stuff like that, but they will call me. Be like, listen, we had 100 people come in this month. and ask for 20% off a THC lollipop.
That we advertised 4 months ago.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But so if you're a big brand and you really are not going to go anywhere,
yeah.
I think that the smartest ad buy that you could place would be in the podcasting world, because your messaging is never going to go away and people will hear it forever and ever. And I think you would need to be a Rolex or a Land Rover or a General Motors or something like that. But
I want to do it. I'm gonna get one, and I'll let go of them with my cold dead hands. Carl, well, tell me this: when you started and you decided to get into this, how much money did you guys dump into this just to get going? It couldn't have been $10,000.
No. I mean, I'm looking around the room at the equipment we have in the studio. It's under $10,000, but maybe $5,000-6,000. I mean, it's on equipment. That's one of the beauties of podcasting is we spent money on some decent equipment because we want to do it right and we want it to sound right and we want to honor the hosts that are coming in and doing shows. But other than equipment, you're really, that's it. That's your overhead.
Your subscriber fees. If you're looking at if you want to host a podcast on Apple, how much is it? How much is that?
Well, you can do it for free. You can do it for free.
Yeah, you guys get some feedback from them and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we are hosted on a podcast hosting subscription service that kind of helps you bundle a data package, and it automates serving it to a lot of the platforms, your Spotify, your Apple Podcasts, some things that make it easier, but it's a nominal fee. It's probably $20, $30, $40 a month
for everybody.
Yeah.
Wow.
For all the podcasts in your
Sure.
Really?
Oh well, no, that's a per show gig,
which is still reasonable.
It's very reasonable, and it's a service we like because they do a good job and they're customer friendly. But there's probably free services out there too that don't offer as much.
I will put also. I want to say this, and this is as I used to say, tip of the 10-gallon hat to the Appen Podcast Network. I will put the sound quality of the podcasts that you guys release,
no question,
up against anybody. Yeah. And I mean, even the big podcasting companies that do it full time and have 9 studios and a dozen producers,
and probably spend $100,000 on their studio.
The sound quality of the podcasts that come out of the studio, 30 miles north of downtown Atlanta and awesome Alpharetta, is second to none. It truly is. And as a host, I know Ben, you would agree with me. As a host, that means a lot because I can go back and listen to an episode from January 2020 when we launched, and then listen to an episode that maybe dropped last Thursday. And there's a big difference in the sound quality. So I also commend you guys for being committed to, I don't know what it is, whether it's software or phasing or how do you make your voice really deep?
Yeah.
Whatever that is, microphones and things. I know that you guys have continued to invest in the products, and as a host, that means a lot to us, and we're very thankful.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Carl, Carl likes to hide, but I don't. I like to drag Carl out. Who you have seen both of us, I'll separate Hans because he kind of, about the time I guess we really got started cooking, he backed up from the table. I don't know if that was on purpose, but it wouldn't have been a bad move. But talk to me about what you've seen and some of the lessons that you have learned sitting here, because we're all friends. Like we don't feel the same way about a lot, but we're all like friendly with each other. Like it's very easy to come in here and do it. And sometimes I forget because I talk to Carl more than I ever talk to any of my guests. And the guy who sits there and produces show after show after show, who had a tremendous amount to do with your success, because I'll be honest with you, I get to come in and record and I get to leave. And the next thing I get is a link on Twitter and it's like, hey, go listen to my show. Like,
new episode. Y'all
do a kick-ass job, because if I were to sit here and do it, and I tell everybody, nobody works harder than Carl.
Well, there's so much to the back end that I don't know that people understand about. I didn't understand it about podcasting before I got into this lane. There is so much on the back end with, you're talking about the different sources where podcasts are available. It used to be, and maybe still is to a certain degree, you have to upload to each of those, whether it's iHeart, whether it's Podcast People, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts, Google. Yep. You have to upload to each of those sources, and there's a lot to do on the back end. There's so much more to it than walking in for us twice a week and sitting here for 42 minutes, 45 minutes, and then literally getting up and walking out the door. There's so much more to it than that.
Yeah.
And Carl has been instrumental in that part of the production of all the shows here.
Well, and I want to be clear too. I say it's anybody can do it. It doesn't cost you a lot of money. Technically, yeah, anybody can do it. But if you want to do it right, if you want to sound right, if you want to have sponsors, if you want to be available on all platforms, if you want to work out a marketing plan, a design plan for your logo, like all of that takes a lot of time, a lot of can be a lot of money, and can be a lot of effort on in this case Carl's part.
My mom hates my logo, by the way. She tells me all the time. Carl, go back to my original question. I want you to jump in here because I think as far as building, especially my second act, I don't, aside from sponsorships, I don't think anybody had to do with the nuts and bolts of making that into the top 100 podcasts on iTunes any more than you
Depends,
do.
Ben. It can be 50. I mean, it depends on the week.
Well,
top 15.
It's been top 15. Well, we're just trying to get through that glass ceiling at top 10. I'll kill for any of those numbers.
I think it had a lot to do with like looking at what people were good at. So I think a lot of things, like there were certain things that we could provide, and there are certain things that like we couldn't bring to the table, and there are things that like Caddy says, oh, he's just going to come into the studio twice a week and like have the show, but it's not this. It's not as simple just like Hans saying anybody could do like the podcast. Like it's sort of finding the synergies between what people can bring to the table. And so like I think allowing like Ben and Caddy the room to like just come in and interview people is I would rather like create the room for them to do that than try to kind of ask them to do everything, because if we're going to go ahead and work on the listing services or the marketing plans and kind of putting things together, then it gives like y'all the room to be realizing all of the gains from what you can already bring to the table.
And I would add focusing on what you all do best. I mean, you two are probably two of the most well-connected people I know.
I don't even know. Thanks, but I don't know about that.
I would agree with you, Hans. Thank you.
But what that means is that you leverage those relationships into helping, create that organic growth and establish kind of a base of listeners that, again, will create that sort of local virality where you're, expanding the show within the market of people And it's huge.
And it has other kind of like implications and different things you learn. I was actually just thinking about it this morning. One thing that Caddy taught me in the process of putting shows together was if you had to push back like a segment twice, then it probably wasn't worth having the first time. So the idea is like, don't just keep pushing it back. So we're talking about radio and podcast. But I had a conversation this morning because I'm working with the newsroom a lot, and kind of used the same thing. And so we had this story that we delayed for 2 weeks, and I said, you know what, if we've delayed it 2 times, it probably wasn't good enough to go out the first time. So you might as well. So there are like just so many things that you can take and apply to other things you're working on.
Well, and I can say the same thing about you, Carl. I truly can. Donna and I were having a conversation this morning about how my second act has evolved. And the beginning, I think for maybe the first 6 months, we sat in here and told stories. That's it. That was the basis of the podcast. And at some point, and there was not a conversation about this, but at some point, there was a transition to more of a morning show style, very kind of fast-paced, audio-intensive, informational 45-minute podcast that people use as an informational source now. I think that we see very aggressive and hefty and healthy day of downloads because people know that it's going to be current. We record both episodes less than 12 hours before they're uploaded. So they're super, super current. I think that there are some cons that could also go with that, but making that transition was never discussed, but it had to be. You're going to run out of stories at some point, and even the best storyteller gets boring after 100. I think we're at 185 episodes right now. And so we made that transition, and I think it's been for the better. But I have taken great notes from Carl and Hans and even Preston Thompson, PT, who now is very involved in the My Second Act podcast. I always said in radio, and I still believe this today. I will never be the smartest guy in the room, and if you can take advice and direction and notes, as they're called, from anybody, why would you not? And so Carl, one specific was, you said to us maybe 8 months ago, let's plan a tease at the top of each episode. I never thought about that. And coming from radio, where teasing is 92% of your content because of the way that the ratings are done. I just thought in podcasting it wasn't necessary. Now, if I go back, and I don't often listen to myself, believe it or not, but if I go back and listen to an episode where there isn't a tease at the top of the episode, it feels naked to me almost because it's just important that the listener have an idea of what's coming up. I'm going to ask you to commit to 45 minutes, and here's why. Because after 45 minutes, here's what you're going to have learned. And that's not saying I'm going to teach you, but we're going to have conversations about the following topics. And if you can work them up in radio, it's called the 80-20 tease. Where you give 80% of the story in your tease, you hold back 20%. You're going to get that 20% to finish to the cycle of this particular conversation in the next 45 minutes. So you have to have the payoff. But that was a great note that I learned for you, and I don't know that I would have ever. And again, it struck me as strange when I broke it down in my mind because, again, radio, you are told tease, tease, tease. I would give up entire breaks in morning drive to tease something coming up, and people would come at you about it. Just tell me the damn story. And it's like you don't understand PPM, which is portable people meter, which is the way that radio ratings are taken. It has nothing to do with the current moment. It has everything to do with what's coming up in the next quarter hour, what's coming up in the next 15 minutes, and why I need you to be here for the next 15 minutes. So we would give up entire content breaks to tease stories. And why you don't have to do that in podcast form. I think that tease at the top of the hour, I think, is so important. Audio is another element that in the beginning we never used. I think that we probably run a dozen audio clips in each episode. That maybe is on the high end, but I won't walk in here if we don't have at least 3 because it provides what's called pattern disruption. And that means that if you're listening in your car or you're listening on the treadmill or you're listening at the office and Donna and I just are rambling, and it does happen, and you're getting bored listening to the podcast. If you suddenly hear a clip of audio, whether it's a clip from Saturday Night Live, whether it's just a clip of audio, it shakes you and it makes your brain go, wait a minute, something's changed. I got to check back in. And so there were lessons that I brought from radio. Pattern disruption was huge in radio to the podcasting lane. And I think that it works. I think that it sounds big time too when you have audio clips. And I want to address, and we don't have to do it now. This is Ben Burnett's show. I want to talk about the music thing and what is the actual law excuse me, about playing a music clip, because we break that rule occasionally on the My Second Act podcast. It's no more than 10, 12 seconds, I don't think. But there are podcasts that will play an entire freaking song.
And not paying royalty money.
Exactly. And I'm all about the royalty money. I totally understand, but it's kind of like the Wild Wild West. So we don't have to do that now, but I've made a note. We'll circle back around to that, Ben.
I've actually wondered, because at one point I had a deal with Hans, and we still may have it. They've just streamlined it where he could play whatever god-awful music he wanted. And this was like early. It was like, hey, what do you think about this? I was like, put whatever dog shit song you want to listen to.
You just got an E-tag.
Well,
I kept waiting for the
for me to complain,
for you to throw up the white flag and say no more of this.
I won't, and I wouldn't do it. It was like some of the worst. It was bad.
Well, people ask me all the time, you're classified, and the My Second Act podcast has 2 classifications from Apple Podcasts. One is entertainment news, and the other is music.
Mm-hmm.
We can't play a damn song.
How do you come up with that? Is that done in house or is that done externally?
Carl, I believe, was the one that's.
Which one are you talking about?
How you come up with your content headings
or classifications?
Your classifications.
I think that's usually done in show development. Like once you set it, you're really not like changing them throughout the entire show. But the idea was like when we're kind of like building the shows at the very beginning, what kind of categories do you want to pick?
We have a feature called the Hype Song Playlist, which is a component of the podcast, much like the letter, which is, I think it's important that you can come in here and do a podcast. If it's a full-time gig, which it really is for me, my wife would argue that. But matter of fact, she told me 2 days ago, listen, if you want to get some more sponsors, you're going to have to get a real job. So I'm on the sponsor pitch right now. It's Cadillac at appenmedia.com. I mean, you don't talk about efficient advertising packages. We're giving them away. But, it's what was I saying?
Well, it just as a quick answer, it just has to do with licensing or the same way that you would do with like a feature film. If you're putting in a song, you need to call the label and go ahead and like figure out the licensing and how much you want to go in.
Or is it the songwriter or the publisher or?
In that case, it would be the publisher.
Okay. We do the Spotify Hype Songs, which is a component of the podcast, and Don and I each come in every episode with a song that's been on our mind, or that we, the premise is really that we listen to on the way here, which is never the truth, but that's new or back on our radar or something like that. Another note, Carl, that you gave us was move the hype song conversations from the top of the show, which we did the next episode, because I started listening. I'm like, we're talking 4 minutes at the most important moments in any podcast are the first 3, because I'm either going to get you or I'm not.
Yep.
And so if we're sitting there rambling on about songs that we like in the first 3 minutes, it's like, I wouldn't listen to that myself, So that was another fan, and we moved that probably now to halfway through the show. But people will say to me, "Why don't you just play the damn song?" And they're beyond. They have no words when you say.
Because I need you to go to
can't."
Gallery Furniture and visit the Wolfman.
He died 17 years ago, Ben. But what is the law? What is the?
Well, the short answer to kind of your question of who's doing it and who's getting away with it is probably that they're not supposed to be doing it. They're probably violating some copyright laws and just daring somebody to challenge them on it.
And a quick note there, like you don't have to actually have somebody hear it and flag it and go down. There's literally like encoding that goes into songs, and so if you even tried to put it on YouTube, immediately you're not going to be able to monetize that episode.
Has Appen Podcast Network ever gotten a letter from anybody about playing music?
Not that I know of.
All right.
Well, and
write that down.
It is.
Do we want to try?
Yeah. And
built this
it's
city.
largely in part, we have some of those royalty-free music subscriptions.
Oh,
so.
it shows.
Ben's still bitter about those reggae tunes I put at the top of his
Go
show.
listen to the first 5. I mean, what he did to me was just cruel and unusual.
That's funny.
I think what was great about it too is that it wasn't like just god awful hip hop over and over. I'd switch it up. We'd go reggae. Then it was like some like
but it's unpredictable. You never
bongo
knew.
drum, gospel, something.
Never knew what you were getting.
It was bad. It was bad.
And I will just say that there's one, just like with music or just like with film, there's a little bit with kind of the audio that you're putting in the podcast, but the same thing to where with news stories, everything, is typically copyrighted, and you'll see some like nonprofit organizations who make it, available through Creative Commons licensing, but every single news story, the first like 140 or 160 or first 200 characters, anybody can use for any reason. Doesn't matter what the licensing is, doesn't matter anything like that. So like you can always use the first 200 characters, even if it's like a New York Times article.
No idea.
Which is why you see like Nextdoor or Feedly or like any of those RSS feeds, like their entire system is just giving you like the first 160 characters. So if they weren't allowed to, then those apps like displaying that just as is would be in trouble.
I'd never thought about that. But
So there
you
is-
have to seek it out,
Right.
Beyond 200 characters,
Right.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Interesting.
Yep.
When you look at it, Hans, Carl, Caddy, like 2 years from now, do you think that the market wises up? Because everybody that we drag in here sponsor wise, and Caddy's just in a class by himself at doing this. He and Donna selling advertising. I'm a poor man's advertiser, but the people at Appen Media would tell you that I'm one of the better podcast sellers they have. What would you say? When do people make that fundamental shift? And what's it gonna be? Because look, when you look at some of my shows, like they knock down, hundreds of episodes, and mine is very guest driven, so it's a very different thing.
Yeah, and we're not. I only think we've had 2 guests in 185 episodes, and that's by design.
And that's got to be like, I will tell you, I pay for it when I start trying to find people. To
Listen,
do it. It's hard.
You have drop a check off or whatever. I'll take your money, Ben.
Well, tell me, when do you guys, besides true crime, what do you see in the next 2 years? Because we're all sitting in here now. I've really, I come and go. I try to do two swings at it a year and roll, 10 in a fall, 10 in a spring kind of thing. And Caddy is
Listen,
no off days.
I don't have a third act, so we got to keep the podcast thing rolling. That's a great question, Hans. Where are we and where are we going?
It's a good question. A lot of it is TBD. We're all ears. We're learning with you guys to the extent, just as much so as you guys are learning with us. We don't know what the future is going to hold I would say for podcasting, but for the media in general.
Yeah.
And
the whole reason I like doing this, and I've told you this, like the day I can leave for 60 minutes, I'm going to do it in a heartbeat. because ever since I was a little kid, like I just watch the interviews of people, and most of the time, 50-50 on 60 Minutes. It's like, hey, I'm Steve Croft. You didn't know I was coming. Like, I don't want to be that guy. Yeah. I want to be the guy that they call 6 weeks in advance and say, hey, you've cured this. We would like to talk about you for 20 minutes. I really have always, and I passed it the opportunity to study it in school. And when you came to me and asked me, I was like, hell yeah, I've always, like, I do it for free. I really, like, truly, I think the people who love what they do are like that. Like, you got to keep a roof over your head, but you like what you do.
Yeah.
Caddy, you're the same. You're the same way.
Love it. And because the biggest difference is in radio for 25, nearly 26 years, I was told you got 2 minutes. You got 2 minutes. This is how you have to set up that 2 minutes. You got T's at the front, got T's in the middle, T's at the back. Okay, well, that's 30 seconds, if not more, of your 2 minutes. You can't talk about this, and this. No one cares about you, nor your kids, nor your personal life. Go have fun.
And it's not true.
Well, you're kind. But in podcasting, it's dialogue. It's long-form conversations. You can spend as much time as you want on a particular subject.
Yeah.
And I think that there are podcasts that focus, on honeybees and bee making an episode. Well, listen, if you're not into that, are you going to listen to that particular podcast? Probably not. So that's why we wanted to go to a multi-topic type format. And again, there are cons with that as well. But I think that, it's for every episode we do, there's probably a 25-page ROS, which is a run of show. But let me tell you something. We will walk in here in a minute and set it aside if we get off on a tributary or a side stream, as they're called.
That's a golden nugget.
Because often that content is the best content you could have, because it is somewhat unplanned. People have asked me, how much do y'all plan? Don and I have one conversation, and it's the night before we walk in here. And we run through the run of show, which I piece together, and Donna sends me text messages with stories that she wants to talk about or whatever. But we, by design and on purpose, we don't talk a lot about it, because we want our reaction and the conversation to be genuine and to be real, which it often is. It's not.
She's good.
She's a rock star. She's a rock star. And in the episode that dropped this past Thursday,
it was awesome.
Talking about the Gabby story. And PT, our producer, and I had a conversation about this. I have learned in here, and I'm so comfortable in the studio now, I have learned to just shut up and let her talk, because she has the perspective. She's the best partner I've ever worked with. And I mean that. And I've worked with some pretty strong partners throughout my radio career. If the former station that I worked at 5 years ago had acted on my suggestion, and that was to bring Donna in as my co-host, they wouldn't do it because for
nepotism, pick one.
A lot of different reasons. Number one being money and power, believe it or not. But had they acted on my request 5 years, because the question is, who do you want to be your new co-host? I want my wife, Donna. Well, you can't have her. Okay, but the question was, who do you want as your new co-host? That pitch was made pretty heavily 5 years ago. They passed on it. Had that move been made, I don't know where we would be, because I do. And I listen, don't think that this isn't tooting my own horn. I'm tooting Donna's horn. She had never been behind a microphone ever in her life until January 2020, when we recorded the first episode. And to listen to her evolve.
She's
and
good.
specifically, again, the conversation that she had from the perspective of a mother of two daughters and a stepson, about Gabby Patino, who was murdered, a 22-year-old young lady who was murdered by her childhood sweetheart. Maybe that sounds rough and a little heavy, but it's the truth. I have listened to that conversation from Thursday's episode that Donna had, or just her take on it, her perspective. I have listened to that probably 5 or 6 times since that episode dropped. And I do not go back and listen to most of the episodes that we do. I just don't. I lived it. When you're here in the moment, you kind of live it. It's like, why would I go back and listen
I remember what we said.
Exactly. I was here. But what her perspective about this story and her advice, and as she said, I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to preach to you, moms and dads. I'm here to offer up some advice that I think could be helpful. And I tell you, she nailed it. I bet she talked for 7-8 minutes straight. And PT said to me afterwards, he said, you were so smart to just let her roll. And I said, listen, I have learned to let her go, because it doesn't matter the topic. She has very strong perspectives and ideas. And I'm just blown away by the way that she has taken to being able to walk into a studio and sit behind a microphone and have a conversation. It's impressive. She's a rock star.
Yeah.
She's a rock star.
Yep.
Well, we wouldn't be in this damn studio, by the way, Kicks, if you'd acted on that 5 years. We'd be in New York City.
Yeah, which would have its own problems.
I know, okay.
You'd be wearing a mask on your forehead.
I wouldn't be.
And not because of COVID.
Well, hey guys, I appreciate it. I'll round out the season here in the next couple weeks. You can catch Caddy. It's Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Are you part of the Appen Podcast Network? Yeah.
It's Tuesdays. It's twice a week. It's Tuesdays and Thursdays.
I cross promote your podcast all the time.
Dick.
How much? So I want to ask. I want to ask real quick.
Such a dick.
I want to ask real quick about social media. With the Ben Burnett show.
It's tough, man.
It is, and that's what I wanted to bring up. It's Donna stays on me, and I do much better now, but stays on me because again, this is my full-time job. You got to push things out, and I'm the type person that if you go back and you look at my Facebook feed or Instagram or my Twitter was hacked about 6 weeks ago, please don't go there.
Yeah, zero followers.
15,000 at one point. I've given it up. If you go back and look at my feed, it's nothing but clips, and I feel like a whore. But Donna says to me, be a whore. Because when you do that, when you go the extra, and I don't mind being a whore, when you go, and I reciprocate, when you go, I mean, sometimes, when you go and you look at my Facebook feed, it's a lot of it, 90% of it is probably, I don't call them clips anymore because I think that's such a, I call them moments. Hey, check out this 58-second moment from the My Second Act podcast. And I'm very specific with that verbiage because who knows who has never seen a post from me before. And if you just put from My Second Act or from my podcast, well, they're not going to know what that is. You have to be pretty specific. The Thursday episode that hit, and I try to do this with everyone, and I've been good at it, I think, in the past 3 months. And I think that the numbers will maybe reflect that, Carl. I'm not sure, but we're going to go with it that do. I get a Headliner app, which is it's one of the tools that you should be using if you're a podcaster, and it's where you get an audio file of your entire episode. I get it like by 12:30 a.m. on release days. I stay up on release days now until about 1:30. By 2 a.m., every episode, I have at least 10 clips, moments from the show, because I've already listened to it, and I've already taken notes and wrote down times, and then I go back and edit those moments out. Combination of Facebook for stories, I think, has to be less than 25 seconds. So you have to know which ones you're harvesting. Okay, this clip's going to be specific for Facebook stories. This one's going to be for my personal page. This is going to be for the podcast page. This is going to Instagram. This is going to Instagram story. I feel like a whore. I do. But it works. And listen, whatever works, do it.
Yeah.
So how much time, Ben, do you spend with your Headliner app? I'll wait.
I don't even know what a Headliner app is. I'm not kowtowing to the Wolfman either.
But it's an element that you have to have in this
Yeah.
world. Not with any business, not just podcasting.
Yeah.
But if you're able to offer up, I'm going to swallow my Chiringa fry, sorry. If you're able to offer up a 33-second moment,
So good.
not a clip, but a moment, that makes someone go, damn, I'm going to go seek this podcast out, then it worked. If just one person does that.
Do you think that has a transition being a guest-driven show, or you think it's the same kind of thing?
I think it would be the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Same thing. Share your nuggets. I shared my nuggets.
Do I have nuggets?
Why don't you reciprocate?
You did that one night, Ben, at the
we're gonna end
City
there.
Center parking garage.
All right.
I'm regretting this decision to join this
Carl, Hans, thank you, Caddy.
Yes, sir.
It's always good to break bread and
Always.
catch up.
It is.
This is the cookout you asked for.
Listen, and I'm very thankful. I will tell you that I had no idea we were doing this.
Well, that was how we wanted it.
Okay. I thought we were just going to come in here and have lunch, and I know you said you want to talk about the business of podcasting. I thought we were going to do that.
I think it's interesting. I'd rather catch you off the cook.
Oh, I think it's fascinating. No, and I think people want to know about the world of podcasting. Can I share my stats real quick? Damn, are we running long, Carl? That's what I always say to PT.
Grip it and rip it.
You have the signals like, PT, where are we in the episode? And that's not me.
We got to get Preston
ready.
on the show again here soon.
We tried. In fairness to Preston, he declined us.
Uh-huh.
In the past 7 days, I'll go quick here. In the past 7 days, the number one radio operator in America, iHeartMedia, and the number two radio operator in America, the fledgling Atlanta-based Cumulus Media,
dog shit,
have both released research projects about podcasting and about their growth. All right, quickly. iHeartMedia CEO Bob Pittman says the engagement is off the charts and admitted that every time iHeartMedia tries to forecast podcasting growth, they fail miserably because the growth is simply too hot. This is a company that 90% of their revenue is based on radio. And Bob Pittman is calling his kids ugly here, and I freaking love it. Cumulus Media, the research study proved that of all media, listen to this, of all media, including radio, podcasting content generates the greatest degree of listener concentration. 81% of podcast listeners pay close attention to what they listen to compared to 49% of traditional radio listeners. Now, not to drag radio even more, but 62% of those who participated in the research study said they concentrated when reading a post on social media. What we're learning here is if you are spending money on radio, we're gonna wait while you call your ad rep and you cancel, because people are more focused on a social media post. They're concentrating more on a social media post by 14% than they are what they're hearing on the radio. So I admire Mary Berner and Bob Pittman, who run iHeartMedia and Cumulus Media. I'm beyond surprised that they would offer this kind of stuff up, because
They're not that in the business.
well, but I think what they're also saying though is we are going to shift, kind of like Appen Media did. Mm-hmm. We're going to shift and put more of a focus on podcasting, because that's where not only the money is, but that's where the people are, and that's where the concentration is.
They don't want to be Blockbuster.
Right, exactly. Did you see that show, the documentary on Netflix?
I haven't.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I just listen. I thought the numbers were extraordinary, and again, if you're currently spending money on radio, call your ad rep and cancel.
Call me, because I'll take it all. And Luke Casey, Bootmaker, Texas, I'm coming for you. That's next.
That's a great sponsor.
I thought it was Land Rover and Rolex.
Well, we can have boots.
Seriously.
Not conflict of interest.
Check the box and cash the check. That's what I tell Donna. Just check the box and cash the check. We don't care who you are. We'll make room for you.
You want to get together and go out to El Paso and get Luke Casey? That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Love
I'm
it.
all about it.
That trade would be insane.
Trade my ass. Who's trading? It's cash in advance with a 6% discount if you pay for the entire year. And I have a square in my Jeep. I will run it right now. It's Cadillac at AppenMediaGroup.com. Thank you for having us.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.
See you
Chiringa,
next
so much.
time. Make sure you reciprocate.
Yes.